Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining me here at Evolutionary Energy Arts once again. Today, we're talking about the human species in general and exactly what is going on. We are a species with amnesia. Have you ever thought about that? I mean, why is it that there are so many things that we just don't know? And there's so many things that are so incongruous with the reality that we have. This is something that Graham Hancock has said, which is really great. I believe we are a species with amnesia. I think we have forgotten our roots and our origins. I think we are quite lost in many ways, and we live in a society that invests huge amounts of money and vast quantities of energy in ensuring that we all stay lost. A society that invests in creating unconsciousness, which invests in keeping people asleep so that we just are passive consumers of products and not really asking anything of the questions of why and who we are here. This is a great statement, so powerful and so true. We are truly brought up and conditioned from birth here in Western culture to be nothing but consumers. It's all consumerism and capitalism. And we have to question things. We have to say, well, why are things this way? I mean, we see things happening right now where we're being told, don't question things. This is just the way things are. And we see people protesting, and we see people standing up and saying, no, I can think for myself, and I'm choosing not to do this or not to do that, or I'm going to do this and do that. As long as I'm not breaking any laws, why should anybody try to stop me? And then let's take a look at the laws in general too. Are there a lot of laws that are there just to keep us asleep? History is always written by the winners. When two cultures clash, the loser is obliterated and the winner writes the history books. Books which glorify their own cause and disparage the conquered foe. As Napoleon once said, what is history if not a fable agreed upon? How do you know what you read in school as a child growing up is real? How do you really know it? Were you there? Can you remember it? Or are you just trusting? Do you think that perhaps the history books in China, in Russia, in Germany, in Africa, in South America are different than the history books in the United States or England or France? Do you think that they're all exactly uniform? Do you think they tell the stories from the same perspective? If you are reading history books in Russia talking about World War One and World War Two, are they going to agree with the history books in the United States? Are they going to agree with the history books in China? And then, of course, we could break it down into smaller subsets. If you're reading a history book written in the United States by somebody that's a Democrat, is it going to be different than a history book that's written by somebody that's a Republican? Ask yourselves these questions. Don't just accept things at face value. Hitler said it well. What good fortune for governments that people do not think? Yeah, that they don't question things. And unfortunately, we have seen what that does to us in the 20th century with the rise of Hitler and Stalin and Mussolini and so many of these just complete, horribly evil leaders that had not the betterment of their countries and their country's citizens, of the people, in mind. Actually, they had nothing but greed and evil thoughts in mind. And we could see where that leads. We must always question. We mustn't just accept anything. If you were brought up in a Republican household, don't just automatically accept that everything that any Republican does is right, and don't just go and automatically defend them. Conversely, if you were brought up in a democratic household, don't just go do the same thing. Realize that we have always been played upon each other. We have always been divided and split up, and this is all done on purpose. This is part of the conditioning and keeping us in control. This is Joseph Campbell, famous historian and famous for his mythological insights, and especially in relating to archetypes. Truly a brilliant man. He says, I think a person who takes a job in order to live, that is to say, for the money, has turned himself into a slave. Work begins when you don't like what you're doing. There's a wise saying, make your hobby the source of income. Then there's no such thing as work, and there's no such thing as getting tired. That's been my experience. I just did what I wanted to do. It takes a little courage at first, but who the hell wants you to do just what you want to do? They've all got a lot of plans for you, but you can make it happen. Okay, well, so who are they? Obviously, those who are in control of our society, the ones that condition us, to respond in certain ways, that they do it all the time. You're either working for their ends or you're working for your own ends. You can work for your own ends and keep your nose clean, so to speak, and come out doing what you truly want to do and still make a living and be able to survive, although sometimes it could be very hard. How many people do you think in the United States and in Western society are truly working at jobs, quote unquote, that are what they truly want to do? And if there was no money, this is what they would be doing. Is that the case with yourself? If money was not an object, if you were rich and you had unlimited supply of money that you could pass on to your heirs, what would you choose to do? Is it what you're doing now, or would you do something else? For when we are working just for money, we are truly slaves. We are no different than the peasants in the Middle Ages working as serfs for their lady or their lord. No different at all. Again, the victors write the history. This is Nathan Rothschild talking. Now, the Rothschilds are probably the single most influential family on the earth and have been for a while. I care not what puppet is placed upon the throne of England to rule the empire on which the sun never sets. The man who controls Britain's money supply controls the British Empire, and I control the British money supply. Nathan Rothschild. And don't just think that, oh, well, that was England way back when. The power shifts. It's shifted to the United States, and now it's going to be shifting out of the United States. You could see it if you look deep and close. You can see what their plans are and where the power is going to shift. But it's still the same families controlling everything that happens. Truly, truly, we are ruled by so few. And it's because the masses are just totally, totally asleep. How did they control us? Well, it's pretty obviously. Just look at advertising. They control us through our vices. They control us through selling sex and keeping us occupied with that. They control us with alcohol, drugs, pharmaceuticals, everything to keep us doped down and not fully conscious and awake. And they control us with like our sports and our activities, getting us so excited about our team winning. We invest so much money. That's why we pay these sports figures multi-millions of dollars, just to keep us occupied and keep us asleep, give us a distraction. As Morpheus says, you have to understand, most of these people are not ready to be unplugged. And many of them are so injured, so hopelessly dependent on the system that they will fight to protect it violently. And we could see that going on right now. As people wake up, you have protests going from every angle. You have governments like in Spain that are keeping a segment of the country away from the freedom they desire, and they crack straight down on it. And there are people, that want to maintain the system. There are so many people, and unfortunately, it's probably the majority that would rather stay totally asleep and just keep their heads in the sand and not acknowledge what's going on. And this is dangerous because it keeps us all slaves. It keeps us all in the dark. And it makes it so that people are afraid to speak up and tell what they know is truth. So, how long have we been manipulated and divided? It goes back as long as we can remember. That's part of the problem. We have amnesia. We don't even know. We only get little bits and pieces of the story. If we look at Genesis 11:6, the Tower of Babel, and the Lord said, "Behold, the people are one, and they have all one language and one common mind. And this is what they begin to do. And now nothing will be restrained from them, which they have imagined to do." So we could see here is a perfectly good example of control. Um, and again, if you were born and conditioned to believe the Bible as infallible and to accept everything that's in it without questioning it, then you're saying, well, God must have had a reason. Must be doing something wrong, and that's why, they destroyed the tower. And I did say they because if you read it, it says, God says, come, look at what they're doing. Let us go down there and let us go and disperse them all over the world. So it's plural. And it's part of the whole system. This system has been in place in all of our recorded history, which is not really too great compared to the actual history of the world itself. It's such a small segment of time. So they keep us caged by our cultural programming. Culture is a mass hallucination. And when you step outside of the mass hallucination, you see what it's worth. It's worth nothing but keeping us enslaved, about keeping us dumbed down, about keeping us in control, just sheeple, just part of the herd, part of the flock. It's going to just timidly and meekly go along with whatever's happening. So, what about our human origins? Well, you remember, of course, what you were taught in school, and that we haven't been around all that long, truly. But even so, they recognize that humans go back quite a ways, or the human family goes back quite a ways. But then we have nothing in the lines of real knowledge about it until the Sumerian cultures, at best about 6,000 years ago. There's evidence all over the world of advanced cultures, tremendous amounts of evidence. There are artifacts, there are manufactured spheres of metal embedded in stone that is 6 million years old, and that there's no way it was there unless it was there, put there millions of years ago. So perhaps it's our cultures that have been destroyed in the past, or perhaps it was cultures of some other race of beings that weren't human. Now, knowledge has reached the point where there's so many people investigating our origins that we realize that what we've been told of being just one race coming out of Africa, it doesn't make any sense. And discovering the different haplogroups, the different subspecies, with what we know in DNA, we're not exactly just one branch of people that came out of Africa, and skin mutated as we went north because of the no need for the excessive melanin in the skin, as if we were in lower latitudes. All this is simply not true. There's a lot more to it. We've actually been played with. Our DNA has been tampered with. We're probably actually we come from several different humanoid species. We are truly a mutt in a lot of ways. We are all different races and different species, but we're all here for a reason. And the reason is not really the betterment of humans and human society. So who created us, really? I mean, how did we really get here? That's a fascinating story, and thankfully, we have discovered an awful lot through having the internet available to us. I mean, now the average person could go and look at all these different mythologies from all over the world and see that they're all saying the same thing, and see that from what we've gathered in all the Sumerian tablets, there are hundreds of thousands, and some say as much as 500,000 Sumerian tablets now that we've uncoded. And the Sumerian culture is the oldest one known. And they basically tell a story that humans were created by the gods in order to do menial labor and basically be a slave race, which is very interesting because in the Bible, when God creates man too, he puts him in the garden to work the garden. Interesting. Um, Fascinating stuff. There's so much to look into when it comes to that. And we can see, what the gods did according to the Sumerian records and other records is basically genetically alter what was here in order to create a worker that had enough intelligence to actually be a useful tool. And again, our history, our recorded history is only about 6,000 years old. And yet we have artifacts that show that there has been a civilization here for millions and millions of years. Most of our history is truly unknown to us, or has been unknown to us. But now, because of the advancements that we have and the discoveries that we've made, we're starting to get a much better picture of what's going on. Just looking at the Bible itself, we have discovered the Nag Hammadi text, the Dead Sea Scrolls, and we realize now that the Bible was not just the 66 books that Constantine put together in 325 AD. There were hundreds and hundreds of books in circulation that were just as valid as the 66 that he chose for his own agenda. And the rest of the copies were burnt and destroyed of those other books. But now we do have copies of them, and they tell a much different story. And you'll find that most of the biblical stories are just little snippets of other stories that go into huge detail and great depth. So I think the controllers have left things in the Bible that they felt like, well, they're not going to decipher this. We didn't give them enough to figure things out. But now we've seen what else was out there as far as knowledge and other books that they did try to destroy. And now we get a much better view of what's going on. Genesis 6 always fascinated me. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bare children to them, the same that were mighty men, which were of old, men of renown. And there are artifacts that, just volumes of artifacts that speak to that truth. And so many of these artifacts, most of them, when they're found, they ending up in the Smithsonian. And there are reports that the Smithsonian has taken tons of them, and they just go basically dump them in the ocean because they just don't want there to be any trace of them. There's others that are locked away. But there is a ton of evidence. If you just do some research, you will see. I mean, sure, there are fake photos on the internet, but there's also things that are actually true. There have been so many different humanoid species inhabiting this planet over millions of years, maybe hundreds of millions of years, that it boggles the mind. And there are physical leftovers, physical remains, and we could see. Now we would be told, oh, well, this was just somebody that had some sort of disease. It's a malformation, or they thought it was a sexy thing to do, so they put boards on the head when they were a baby and elongated the skulls. Well, that did go on, but that was in emulating the gods, quote unquote. It's interesting too, because cultures around the world all have stories of the gods. All of them do, and they're all very, very similar. The pyramid, well, we're very familiar with the pyramid. It's showing here how things work. You have slaves at the bottom, and this is an Egyptian pyramid. Farmers, artisans, merchants as we ascend. scribes, soldiers, government officials, and the pharaoh at the top, showing basically how the hierarchy goes. And of course, the pyramid has a lot of negative connotations. Pyramid schemes, how people will get you to, give money to a pyramid scheme. And of course, it always makes the ones at the top the most money. And this is nothing new. We could see it in the Egyptian times. We could see it from a couple centuries ago. And this one's showing capitalism at the top and the different classes as we go down. Of course, class warfare is real and does exist. So who really runs the world? Well, on this pyramid, they're coming to the conclusion that the IMF is at the top. And that's probably not the case. The IMF is another tool as well. But you have secret societies, you have all the different political groups going into taxes, NATO, Federal Reserve, UN, and Council on Foreign Relations, the Bilderbergers, etc. And this one's from the website In5D, which is a great website. I would definitely go check his website out. This one might be a little bit more accurate. Secret societies and going on up to the United Nations, Federal Reserve, Council on Foreign Relations, the Bilderbergs, the Vatican, and then actually jumping up into non-human entities. And here he has at level 3, the Draco and Reptilians. Over here at level 2, higher Anunnaki. So having the Anunnaki running the Dracos and the Reptilians. And then we get into interdimensionals, which the Anunnaki themselves might be, some of them interdimensionals as well, being able to go in between the third, fourth, or higher dimensions, probably just the third and the fourth. And then you have archons and other invisible matter. So the highest level is basically malevolent extraterrestrials who literally exist and feed off of fear, death, pain, and suffering, misery, and sacrifices, controllers of the archons. The archons are a Gnostic term, and they're basically very, very high energy. You could think of them as like dark angels, and they feed off of fear and negativity. Have you ever wondered why so many of the ancient religions, and you see it in the Bible again, perform blood sacrifice? Do you think a benign, loving entity, a benign, loving God would want a blood sacrifice? Really? That doesn't seem to make sense. If God is love, then why would he crave blood? It really doesn't make sense. Again, when you believe things like that, you're just simply accepting. You're not using your mind and using logic. And this is an ancient sculpture of what appears to be a reptilian holding a baby. It's interesting too, as far as like the Sumerian kings list before the flood, because it does look like we were genetically tampered with, for sure. At one time, humans lived much, much longer lives than we do now. And we have some estimates say, up to 90% junk DNA. I mean, high percentages of junk DNA. It's not really junk at all. Perhaps it's disconnected DNA. Things that have been tampered with so that we cannot realize exactly what's going on in our own true power. So what are governments? Governments are supposed to be by the people and for the people. Isn't that the basic idea? That the people put a government into effect to go ahead and take care of the needs of the people. It's not what we really have. They tend to be owned by corporations, here he believes, run by psychopaths, and quite a few are. Lying about imaginary economy based on debt, fueled by illegal wars, yeah, that's pretty true in most cases. Destroying ecosystems, yeah, it's undoubtedly true. Poisoning food and water with chemtrails, with fluoride in the water, which also affects the pineal gland and our ability to be fully conscious. Decreasing education, basically just brainwashing us and educating us the way they want us to. Increasing prisons, which the United States has as many people in prison as the state of Connecticut has people. It's pretty crazy, with the amount of people in prisons. And that's just another labor force. That's another workforce. Manipulating the media, we know that now. I mean, if you talked about the mainstream media being totally manipulated in the United States back in the 80s or 90s, most people would not have believed you. Now, most people believe. Foreclosing on homes, suppress free energy technology. Tesla is the one that gave us free energy way back, probably 80, 90 years ago now. It's all suppressed. It's the same as with cures for diseases like cancer. So we're basically made so that we could struggle, starve, and basically do nothing but simply work our entire lives just to pay taxes, to vote and trust the government to better ourselves. This is not a system that's in place to really do the people good. We know the standard of living in the United States and in the Western world in general has been just heading down. This is a writing by Edward Bernays. He's the father of modern advertising on manipulating the masses. The conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society. Those who manipulate the unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country. We are governed, our minds are molded, our tastes are formed, our ideas suggested, largely by men that we have never heard of. And that does also include, the president, who doesn't really have all the power that we think he does, or our elected officials. This is a logical result of the way in which our democratic society is organized. Vast numbers of human beings must cooperate in this manner if they are to live together as a smoothly functioning society. In almost every act of our daily lives, whether in the sphere of politics or business, in our social conduct or our ethical thinking, we are dominated by the relatively small number of persons who understand the mental processes and social patterns of the masses. It is they who pull the wires which control the public mind. A great movie that really shows how things probably are is Dark City. It's an older movie in which the character keeps waking up and having amnesia. What he thinks is his world is really nothing but an illusion controlled by these other beings that he didn't even know existed. And these beings are very much archonic and malevolent. And they use humans to use humans. So they control humans with humans. And they wipe out the memory of humans. So why are we having all these superhero movies all of a sudden? Well, it appears that just as we are controlled by dark forces, there are also light forces trying to wake us up to who we are and what our possibilities are. And if you see what movies are coming out, it seems like almost every other one is about superheroes. And what's the message they're trying to get through? This was a fabulous scene which caused me to laugh for a long time, in which the Hulk, who is, obviously David Banner going green, takes the god Loki and basically just smashes them all around and then leaves them on the ground whimpering and says, "Puny god." So what's the message in that? Perhaps, they're trying to tell us the reality of who we are and what type of power we truly have. If you look into the mystic traditions and you look into some of the Eastern traditions, you will see, there is a truth. The whole universe is consciousness. It's nothing but consciousness. And the individual is a piece of that consciousness. Each one of us. We're experiencing life in order that the universe itself can experience itself from different perspectives. And each of us create the life we experience. So we're basically individual units of consciousness. Part of the greater whole experiencing our reality. Unfortunately, we're caught in this loop here that has taken our freedom away and caused us to be, for the most part, slaves to the system. But that's not what our destiny is supposed to be. Because we are consciousness itself. We have untapped, unlimited ability within us. And there are energies coming in now that are going to send mutative forces that will reawaken our DNA, and that is what's going on now. Gandhi said, first they laugh at you, or first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, and then you win. So we have to have patience. We have to spread the word, wake up more people, as many people as possible, to what's going on. Spread the word. Stand up for your truth. Share what you know. Don't be embarrassed to say, yeah, obviously there's extraterrestrials out there. There probably are interdimensionals too. Science is bearing out these facts, and the elite can't keep these things hidden. So step up, share what you know, and be true to yourself. And don't just accept things because we have been conditioned to do that. Please like, share, and subscribe. Help me get the word out. I thank you for joining me here at Evolutionary Energy Arts and look forward to speaking with you all again. Peace.